When you look up at the night sky, what do you see? Stars, silence, wonder? But over 1,000 years ago, Muslim scholars looked at the same sky and saw purpose. They saw the fingerprints of a creator, the rhythm of the universe, and the call to understand it, not just with faith, but with science. In a time when much of the world slept in darkness, the Islamic world lit up the skies with observatories, instruments, and a passion for truth. Men like al-Biruni, al-Tusi, and Ulu Beg weren't just astronomers, they were worshippers of the one who made the stars. This is not just a story of science, it's a story of faith, brilliance, and how Islam didn't just tolerate knowledge, it built a civilization on it. Today we rediscover a forgotten truth, how Islam shaped the cosmos long before telescopes did. This is their story one. Al-Biruni, the father of Islamic astronomy. In a time when most of the world still believed the earth was flat or unmoving, a Muslim scholar sat beneath the open sky with nothing but his intellect, instruments, and an unshakable thirst for truth. That man was al-Biruni. Using nothing more than a stick, a mountain, and the movement of the sun, al-Biruni calculated the Earth's circumference with an error margin of less than 1%, a number so precise that NASA today confirms its shocking accuracy. He had no satellites, no GPS, no observatory domes, just faith, reason, and relentless observation. But al-Biruni didn't measure the Earth to show off knowledge. For him, science was worship, and the universe was a book written by the divine. He believed that understanding creation was a way to get closer to the Creator. His passion wasn't for fame or fortune, it was to fulfill the Quranic call. Do they not look at the sky above them, how we have built it and adorned it? Quran 56. Al-Biruni's astronomical contributions didn't end with Earth. He mapped stars, calculated planetary motions, and predicted lunar eclipses, not centuries after the West, but centuries before. Even scientists today are stunned that a man in the 11th century could reach such levels of precision. In 1973, physicist Dr. George Sarton called al-Biruni one of the greatest minds known to history. But here's what makes him different. While the modern world explores space to dominate, al-Biruni explored to reflect. He didn't just look at the sky, he listened to it, and in every orbit, every calculation, he heard the whisper of the divine. 2. Prayer, Qibla, and precision. When people think of astronomy, they imagine telescopes, galaxies, or space missions. But for the early Muslim scholars, the stars weren't just a mystery to solve, they were a guide to worship. 5 times a day, millions of Muslims turned their hearts and bodies towards the Kaaba in Mecca. But how do you find a single point on Earth, from any corner of the globe, before satellites or maps? That's where the brilliance of Islamic astronomy rose. To determine the Qibla, direction of prayer, and the exact times for each Salah prayer, Muslim scholars began crafting tools that would one day shape the future of science. Instruments like the astrolabe, the armillary sphere, and the quadrant, masterpieces of geometry and engineering. They weren't built in laboratories for curiosity. They were born out of devotion. Where others saw stars as distant lights, Muslims saw a divine schedule, guiding them when to bow, when to break, and where to face. This sacred purpose led to the rise of some of the world's earliest observatories in Baghdad, Cairo, Toledo, and Samarkand. These weren't just scientific centers, they were spiritual stations. Astronomers like al-Zakhali, al-Khwarizmi, and Ulu Beg didn't just map the sky, they calculated time to the second, helping communities across continents pray in harmony. Modern science recognizes this legacy. Even today, many astronomical terms come from Arabic: zenith, nadir, azimuth, all echoing the call of a civilization that studied the cosmos to serve the Creator. This wasn't just science, it was submission. It wasn't just calculation, it was connection. For the Muslims of the Golden Age, the sky wasn't a ceiling, it was a compass, a clock, and a canvas of worship. 3. Preserving and elevating ancient knowledge. In a time when much of Europe's intellectual light had dimmed, a different kind of dawn was breaking in the Islamic world. The great libraries of Baghdad, Cordoba, and Damascus became sanctuaries, not for silence, but for ideas. While the world forgot the names of Aristotle, Ptolemy, and Arwapata, Muslim scholars remembered. They translated ancient Greek, Roman, Persian, and Indian astronomical texts into Arabic, not to copy, but to correct, expand, and elevate. It was more than translation. It was transformation. In the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah in Baghdad, scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq and Tabet ibn Qurra carefully preserved texts that would have been lost forever. But they didn't stop there. They questioned, they calculated, and they created new theories. They challenged errors in Ptolemy's geocentric model, improved Indian astronomical tables, and introduced new mathematical methods for tracking planetary motion centuries before Europe's so-called Renaissance. They weren't just preserving the past, they were preparing the future. This act of intellectual protection laid the foundation for modern astronomy. European scientists like Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo would later study works that had once passed through Arabic hands. The Islamic Golden Age was not a bridge between civilizations, it was the lifeline of knowledge itself. And what inspired this pursuit? Not just curiosity, but faith. The Quran repeatedly commands reflection on the sun, moon, and stars, not as objects of worship, but as signs for the wise. This divine motivation created a civilization where science and spirituality walked hand in hand. Islam didn't guard knowledge in vaults. It carried it through centuries, polished it with purpose, and handed it to a world that had once forgotten how to dream. 4. The birth of observatories. Before the telescope reached the hands of Galileo, the night sky had already been mapped, not in Europe, but in the heart of the Islamic world. In Maraga, Iran, the year was 1259. While much of the world stared at the stars with wonder, Nasir al-Din al-Tusi and his team studied them with precision. The Maraga Observatory wasn't just a building, it was a beacon of brilliance, equipped with massive instruments, celestial charts, and scholars from across the Muslim world. It became the center of astronomical innovation, built not with just bricks, but with belief that the cosmos reflects the majesty of the Creator. A century later, in Samarkand, Uzbekistan, the Ulu Beg Observatory rose, even more advanced, even more detailed. Here, scholars calculated the length of the solar year with stunning accuracy, off by only 58 seconds compared to today's data. Ulu Beg, a ruler and scientist, personally directed these calculations. These observatories weren't driven by empire or ego, they were driven by Iman faith. Every angle they measured, every arc they drew, was in pursuit of understanding the signs Allah placed in the heavens. And what happened to these findings? Nasir al-Din al-Tusi's planetary models, especially the famous Tusi couple, a geometric solution for planetary motion, were so advanced, they ended up in the hands of Nicholas Copernicus 3 centuries later. Historians now acknowledge that Copernicus's revolutionary heliocentric model may have been inspired directly by these Islamic works. This is not speculation. It's cited in the Journal for the History of Astronomy and confirmed by modern research and scientific transmission between cultures. What Europe called the discovery, Muslim scholars had already documented under starlit skies, in ink and devotion. They didn't need telescopes to reach the truth. They had discipline. They had faith. They had vision, centuries ahead of their time. 5. The Quran as inspiration for cosmic curiosity. When the Quran declared, He created the sun and the moon, each floating in an orbit, Quran 21:33, it wasn't just poetic, it was profound. In an era when many believed the heavens were fixed, motionless, or even carried on mythical creatures, the Quran introduced an entirely different vision, one of precision, balance, and movement. This verse, and many like it, lit a fire in the hearts of Muslim scholars, not just to gaze at the stars, but to understand them. It was the Quran that made them believe. If Allah said there's an orbit, then there must be one. If Allah described a system, then it must be measurable, discoverable, and purposeful. And so began centuries of cosmic curiosity. Islamic scholars such as Ibn al-Shatir, al-Farghani, and al-Zarqali developed some of the earliest models of planetary motion, centuries before Kepler and Newton. Their works detailed the elliptical motion of planets, their epicycles, and the mathematics of celestial orbits, all rooted in a drive to uncover what the Quran had already hinted. And today, NASA confirms every planet, star, moon, and even galaxies all travel in specific orbits, governed by gravity and time. The heliocentric system, orbital mechanics, and the laws of planetary motion are now taught globally as scientific fact. But the seeds of this knowledge, they were planted in the Quran 1400 years ago. To Muslims, the cosmos was not chaos. It was a divine system waiting to be understood. Every rotation, every eclipse, every precise alignment in the sky was a sign, not of randomness, but of a designer far greater than the universe itself. And so, the study of astronomy in Islam was never just science, it was ibadah, worship, because to study the heavens was to reflect on the one who placed them there. 6. Science with soul. In today's world, science is often separated from the sacred. Equations stand alone, stripped of meaning. Discoveries are pursued for profit or power. But during the Islamic Golden Age, science had a soul. For scholars like al-Biruni, Ibn Sina, and Nasir al-Din al-Tusi, studying the stars wasn't just intellectual, it was spiritual. To them, each star was an ayah, a sign, and each orbit, a reflection of divine order. They didn't believe in science despite their faith. They believed in it because of it. The Quran encouraged observation. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth are signs for those of understanding. Quran 3:190. This wasn't metaphor. It was a direct invitation to study the universe, not for vanity, not to challenge the Creator, but to grow closer to Him. So, when they observed planets, mapped stars, or built astronomical tables, it wasn't cold data they were collecting. It was evidence of Allah's perfection, and this is what made their work different from the world around them. While Europe struggled with the tension between science and religion, Muslim scholars found harmony. They didn't just build observatories, they built prayer spaces inside them. They didn't just chart constellations, they recited Quranic verses as they did. Their writings carried two languages, the language of mathematics and the language of devotion. Even today, many historians highlight this unique synthesis. Science historian George Saliba writes that the Islamic world's scientific growth was deeply rooted in the religious and intellectual structure of Islam. Their science wasn't cold, it was warm with worship, alive with awe. They were not just astronomers, they were believers. And their telescopes weren't just tools, they were windows to Jannah. They looked at the stars and saw more than light. They saw purpose, they saw patterns, they saw Allah. From al-Biruni's calculations to the precision of Qibla instruments, from observatories lit by lanterns to theories that shaped the West, every formula, every chart, every night under the sky was not just a search for knowledge, it was a journey back to the one who created knowledge. Islam didn't ask its followers to close their minds, it asked them to open their eyes, to observe, to reflect, to discover. And today, as we launch satellites, build telescopes, and chase galaxies, let us not forget those who first looked up, with faith in their hearts and questions in their hands. They were not just pioneers of astronomy, they were witnesses to divine wisdom written across the sky. So which of the favors of your Lord will you deny? Quran 55:13. The universe is not empty. It's filled with signs, waiting for the believer to see them, and for the heart to remember who placed them there.